Good evening. I'm Ellison Barber in for Tom Yamas. President Biden delivering one of the most consequential speeches of his 50-year political career. The president speaking to the nation from the Oval Office on his decision to drop out of the 2024 race.
Here in this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title.
The president surrounded by his family, sitting off camera, but to the left of him for this historic 11-minute address. President Biden officially passing the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, giving high praise to the de facto nominee.
Just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country.
So will Harris carry on his policies or carve her own path in Washington? And how much will President Biden join her on the campaign trail, if at all? The president also laying out his plans for his final months in office, hoping to reframe this final chapter of his political legacy that's recently been overshadowed by the unraveling of his campaign. We want to get right to NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell for more on this speech and what it means moving forward. Kelly, just take us into the initial reactions that you were hearing from sources both inside of the White House and on Capitol Hill. What did people make of this speech?
Well, in many ways, this was a giant exhale after some weeks of real turmoil for the president, for his family, for his party, and by extension for the nation. To have a sitting president choose to not run again is, in and of itself, an historic moment. And so the president using the Oval Office to talk about that. There will be some who will hear the politics of this night, where he is vouching for his vice president, explaining that he is handing off to her and that she will be the candidate. And he implores the American people to make a decision that favors democracy and to lay out the stakes. Some will hear that in political terms. Others will see it as a sitting president who is choosing to not go forward beyond this first term, to not compete for a second term, even though he said he believed his time in office merited a second term, but that he also thought that there is a time for fresh voices and, in fact, younger voices. And so in those ways, it's a historic speech capping a half century of public life in different offices, from the U.S. Senate to the vice presidency and then in the Oval Office as president, and laying out what the public should expect over the next several months, that he has plans that he wants to try to execute on issues that are core to his agenda, and some new areas that he has not talked about publicly much, including some reforms for the Supreme Court and ideas for dealing with that. But this was a speech about what really inspired him to run in the first place in 2020. He didn't use the phrase in quite the way we've heard him do it before, but the soul of America. He invoked historical figures from George Washington to Benjamin Franklin to Abraham Lincoln to talk about the importance of the choice and maintaining democracy. Again, those who don't support Joe Biden will hear that as overtly political, but he laid the groundwork now for the final chapter of his public life, for the final months of his campaign, and then he went out into the Rose Garden where staff, the employees that have been a part of his team, and certainly many of them who have supported him politically, were gathered. They had watched the speech on screens. They gathered for refreshments and to hear from the president. As you mentioned, his close family members in the Oval Office, which is unusual for a major address. That's typically not the case, but it gives you a sense of the importance and the personal overtones of all of this. The family has always been part of his decision-making structure, and they certainly were when it comes to this decision. And the First Lady and some members of the family will actually leave tonight for the Olympics, representing the United States at the opening ceremony and doing some other events at the Olympics on behalf of the United States. So this was a night of real emotion for the president, difficult decision, as he made clear, but one where he says that he is putting the good of the country in front of his own personal ambition. Ellison?
Kelly, I do want to play a little more for our viewers and just get your reaction to this one moment in particular where it in some ways was sort of Biden's final words on the evening, where he talked about this idea of America and whether or not we have kings, dictators. Let's listen and then we'll talk right after.
The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. We just have to keep faith, keep the faith, and remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's simply nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So let's act together, preserve our democracy.
You know, it's hard, given the rhetoric we've heard on the campaign trail, to take Trump out of this speech. But at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think he mentioned him by name tonight. But in that moment, I'm curious, from what you know about this president and his team, when he was talking about that idea of kings and dictators and the choice being in the hands of Americans, do you think he was hoping to just inspire America and Americans about what we could be? Or do you think that was really more directly a warning about the possibilities in his view of another Trump term?
Well, he did not mention Donald Trump by name, and from the Oval Office, it would be unusual for him to do so, with the exception of talking about the political violence that took place 10 days ago or so. Clearly, when he makes a reference to kings and dictators, that is about the forces that are at play in the world currently and what we have seen over time. There are these populist impulses. There are authoritarians who are seeking to gain advantage, and clearly Donald Trump has talked about the notion of being a dictator on day one, something that Joe Biden has referenced in his overtly political speeches a number of times. So this does walk right up to the line of politics, but he did try to put it in the trappings of American democracy, the choice for the American people, whatever choice they choose to make, but to exercise that right to preserve democracy. That was really the underpinning of what his remarks were tonight, and certainly part of what will be a long national farewell.